Well, thank you very much. It's my task today to outline Federal Labor's position on behalf of my colleagues. It's a relatively easy task. We are against this funding model. We opposed it in the Parliament, we'll oppose it in the Senate, and we'll continue to oppose it. We voted last sitting week to stop this becoming law. We lost in the House of Representatives, that happens a little bit. But we have higher hopes for the Senate when we return. Now, more important than that, we have an alternative as well. We will restore the funding cuts on coming to office. It has been and will be the biggest single funding commitment we've made. As Shadow Treasurer, I approve them all, and I can tell you I'm not approving any others that are this big. We oppose it, we oppose the current model, and we have an alternative for various reasons. We've heard a lot of them very passionately put to us tonight. Let me just run through briefly a few of them. Firstly, as has been said, this is a funding cut. You can't cut 30 billion, then put some back and say it's not a cut. It is a cut. The last thing we need to do is cut funding to education in Australia. So we oppose that on that level alone. We also oppose the model because it is not needs-based and it is not sector-blind. As has been said, there was a bit of excitement on the day when the Prime Minister announced he was cutting funding to the nation's richest schools. We even said, well, that sounds reasonable, we'll support that. It turns out not to be the case. It turns out in case after case that we've outlined in Parliament that the neediest schools receive the smallest increases or the most modest changes to their funding profiles because they're not increases. And the wealthiest schools in Australia continue to receive big increases. So we can't support the model or the quantum. Now let me just talk for a few brief moments about why this is our approach, why we have committed to restore the $22 billion cut over the next decade, why we did that. Sometimes in opposition you are faced with a conundrum, with a difficult choice. You're faced with the argument that what's being put forward by the government is not quite how you would do it, not how you would design it. It's not as good as what you would do in office, but it's a step forward. It's better than where we are now. So sometimes we have to support things even though they're not done in the way that we would do. And there are sometimes difficult arguments that we have in the caucus, in the shadow cabinet, about whether we should support something which is not quite how we would do it. This was not one of those occasions. The shadow cabinet immediately, unanimously agreed to oppose this legislation because it was crystal clear to us that this was unacceptable, as did the caucus. Why is this so important to us? Because we know that in Australia in 2017, your parents' wealth has a greater determinant on your educational outcomes than is the average in the developed world. Australia in 2017. That is unacceptable to us. We will not let it stand. And we know that funding counts. The argument's changed. We were told by the government up until a few weeks ago that actually money doesn't matter when it comes to education. That was the argument put to us, that money doesn't matter. Well, we know that's the case. We know, as you know better than us, but we know that money isn't all that counts. But we know that it's the fundamental starting point. That without the money, teachers can't do their job. They can't apply the resources needed to improve educational outcomes. And if money doesn't matter, why do so many people who can afford it pay so much on private school fees if they don't think money matters when it comes to education? We also know that this is a matter of social justice to us, that every Australian, regardless of where they live, their background, their parents' wealth, should have the same investment in their education. This is about real needs-based funding, a school resource standard, which was at the centrepiece of the education policy we legislated in office. We know that's the case, that a child, regardless of whether they're the daughter of an Indigenous single parent or the children of two brain surgeons on Sydney North Shore, should have the investment in them to grow to their full potential, because unless every Australian grows to their full potential, our nation does not grow to its full potential. This drives us as a matter of social justice, but it drives us as simply a matter of good economics as well, that every Australian should grow to their full potential. So this is important to us. I said in a speech a couple of years ago that Gonski is in our DNA in the Labor Party. And somebody from the Teachers Federation came up to me at the Labor Party National Conference and said, "Look, Chris, we made a badge." And it said, "Gonski's in our DNA," which was a rather proud moment for me. So, but we see, as Western Sydney's MPs, we see these stories every day. In the lead up to the last election, I debated the Treasurer at the National Press Club. And I decided to make education funding one of the key points in the debate. And I thought, well, how can I make this not just about the numbers, not just about the economics, but how can I make sure that what we're talking about actually gets through the TV cameras and into the public consciousness? So I talked about St John's Park High School, just outside my electorate. Happens to be where I went to school. Happens to be where my daughter goes to school now. She's graduated Smithfield Public, Cheryl, and is now in St John's Park High School. And I told the story about how at St John's Park High School they've used their Gonski funding for special needs children who just a few years ago would not have been at work, would have been in what we used to call sheltered workshops, and would have certainly been on welfare. And now, because of the extra investment in them, the one-on-one assistance to ensure that they graduate St John's Park High School work ready, they are now working in clubs like this right throughout Western Sydney and in restaurants and earning money, paying tax, not drawing on the government, but contributing to government, paying back, and much more important than that, enjoying fulfilling lives as citizens of this country, which they deserve no less than any other citizen, and no citizen anywhere of any age or ability or wealth deserves. And we won't get that society until we have proper, real, adequate, sufficient needs-based funding. We won't get it under this government, I'm afraid, but it will come, and it will come if we continue to campaign and all of us work for it. Thank you very much.